Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. It's good to see you, David Kessler, once again. We haven't chatted in a long time, and as all the crazy things go on around us in this world, I said, we have to talk to David again. I got to recharge my batteries and fill my tank with knowledge around the subjects you're so smart and expert on. And so we couldn't wait to talk to you. And I'm glad you're available, and I'm glad you're doing well. David, what's going on in this crazy world?
I don't know if there's more grief than there ever was, or whether we're finally beginning to talk about it. Maybe that's something for minds bigger than mine to discuss, but I do think we're beginning to talk about loss in a way that we never have, but we certainly have more to think about personally, collectively, the world. But it is a tough time for us.
You're the foremost expert in the world, frankly, on grieving, death, loss. And I have to wonder, and when I was anxious about having this opportunity to chat with you, I found myself on a train on the way in here before, thinking about you and wondering, because of the subject you're expert on, and you're called upon all the time to teach, to train, to research, to educate, to counsel people who are on the front lines of dealing with us as humans when tragedy strikes, when health issues strike, and we have a loss. How do you maintain your own boat? How do you keep your emotions in check? I suspect I know, but I'd love to hear you tell us.
It is hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It is hard. There's many situations that I walk away from heartbroken just listening to them. I try to have balance in my life. I'll give you an example. Years ago, my son was probably 5 or 6 years old, in the back seat of the car, and I took a call, and he heard me talking, and he said to me afterwards, Dad, it seems like everyone's dying. And I said to him, yeah, I shouldn't have taken that call just then, but I'll tell you, it sounds that way because of the work I do. And if your dad was an auto mechanic, it would seem like everyone's car is always broken. We gotta make sure we look at some of the good things that happen in life too all the time.
I had occasion to be in Rome over the weekend, and I'm not particularly religious, and I'm very sensitive to that and thinking about how do I work on that. So I'm a lapsed Catholic, but I had occasion to be in Rome this weekend, and had occasion with a small group of very wonderful, thoughtful, caring people. I have an audience with the Secretary of State of the Vatican, a wonderful Cardinal, Pietro Pilon. And we were talking about all the issues they are working on now, the Ukrainian situation, the Israeli Gaza situation, 4 wars that he told us about that are active within Africa. And it was just like piling on all the things they're working on and talking about, meeting on, trying to have some influence and sway over. And at the end of an hour and 15 minutes, I asked him, Your Holiness, what gives you hope? And he thought, and he just cocked his head for a minute or two and said, Jim, there are 2 things that cause me to have a heart full of hope. He said, one is my deep faith in God. And he went on to explain that. And then he said, but you have to remember that the things we hear about, the things we know about are bad and evil. And then he started reciting, he said, look at your group here. You've come together to help further medical education, further research, give of your time, give of your money. He goes, that's happening all over the world, but it's not newsworthy. and it's not going to capture our attention. But what gives me hope is the goodness of man. And the vast majority of people are good and want to do good things and want to be part of a positive and constructive part of community, but it's not newsworthy. But I hear that crescendo of their good deeds, their good intentions, and their good work all day, every day. And it made us all feel peaceful. And it was just so comforting to hear him say that after an hour of all the things he's working on.
And I think that's so true. And thank you for sharing that. Listen, my company, we do lots of philanthropy. We want to help the world. I think there's something important about taking the problems in the world personally, not as in it's our fault, but as it's our responsibility to do something. And I'll tell you the other thing in this work, sometimes in trauma and grief work, folks can become so hopeless. And I will often say, in time, I want you to begin to look for the good. And I'm very clear, I'm not trying to give someone a silver lining, because in death, there's not really a silver lining. And I was working with a woman who was at one of our shootings, the Las Vegas shooting. It was a concert, as you may remember.
Sure.
She was pretty close to the front. And I was talking to her as I was trying to help her later, and she had a lot of survivor's guilt and all those things. And I was talking to her about this idea of finding the good in the world again. And she goes, there's no good. And I said, there's good in every situation. And she said, was there good in the shooting? And I said, it wasn't there, but I wonder if that's a question for you to ask yourself. And she came back a few weeks later and she said, you know what, David? There was a man who was in the front row in a wheelchair. He came to the concert by himself. And when the shooting starts, she said, we all ran under the stage because we were so close. And she said, I looked at him in the crowd, wondering where to go and how to get out, and no one was there to help him. And she said, some guys ran out from the stage and picked him out of the wheelchair and brought him underneath to safety with us. And she goes, I found the good. And there is good in this world, even in those tragic situations. Sometimes when we're at our worst, we become our best.
What that tells me is a couple of things. One is we have to exercise our thinking to make sure we're doing what you suggested she do in to help deal with that situation. And the other thing is that there's salvation, there's hope, and you used the word hope before. I think what we're witnessing in the world where are these conflicts is that the most dangerous male is someone without hope. And today is my mother's birthday. She's been gone a long time. But I'm very lucky because the second part of what you're suggesting is relationships and community. And I'm fortunate enough to be the oldest of 5 children, and we have a text chain. It's called SIBS, S-I-B-S. First thing this morning is a text from my sister reminding us that today would have been Mom's 93rd birthday. And one sister attaches a picture of one of her favorite pictures of our mom, which we probably hadn't seen in a long time. And so what would be otherwise maybe a somber reflection, because we're part of a community and because someone else made a compliment about how Mom would be proud of us because we have a brother that's developmentally disabled, and we make sure he's a centerpiece of our family, that he's taken care of, and that he has opportunity, and that we're always visiting him, and that our kids and now our grandkids, he's part of their lives. And so without us having that community of the siblings and our partners, it would just be a day for us to think on our own. But being part of a group, someone is going to light the spark of, this is a positive day. So the thing I most wanted to ask you about is something in your last book that you wrote about that I've heard now a couple of few times. So I have a couple of friends who are really smart, and they both happen to be psychologists and quite prominent. One is Dr. Chloe Carmichael, and she's a prominent psychologist and just a wonderful person. And she wrote a book called The Gift of Anxiety. And I won't do it justice, but to give you the thumbnail, it's anxiety is natural, and it's not always negative, and at the very least, it's an energy boost. And how you choose to use that energy boost of anxiety and how to properly channel it is what makes a difference about whether it's negative and stays negative, or you can use it to do positive things because you have your checklist and you know how to handle it and marshal that energy for positive. And she talks a lot about we can rewire our brains. And the other prominent psychologist who's become a good friend is Dr. George Everly out of Johns Hopkins, who's an expert on PTSD and group trauma, reactions to natural disasters and war at all. And he tells us a personal story, which he told us in the group at 1-800-Flowers. We had a team leadership meeting, and George came and spoke with us at dinner. And he's just a wonderful guy, and he spoke about the same thing. George has written 28 books, got a couple of PhDs. I could go on and on about him. He's just an extraordinary guy, and someone I admire, respect, and love a great deal. And he talks about 28 books. He also was born so dyslexic that he couldn't go to regular school. He couldn't pass, with it. But he said he learned to overcome it by rewiring his brain. You talk a lot about exercises to rewire our brain. And the inverse of that is if you let grief consume you, if you let anxiety consume you, you are wiring your brain a way that you don't want to, because an anxious person who doesn't do anything to fight off that anxiety has a quicker pathway in their brain to be anxious all the time. Is it the same in the world of in the path of grief?
Absolutely. Here's the thing that I think is important for people to think about, this idea of what we think matters. Early in grief, just like early in trauma, we don't have control over our thoughts, over the images that come up, over the bad memories that may have gotten seared into us. Sometimes we're left with some really bad images. Now, as time goes on, we begin to have the ability to change our thoughts. So, for example, if every time someone calls me and says, "How are you doing, David? I know your loved one died," and I say to them, "I don't feel like I'm ever going to get better. I don't think I'm ever going to live again. This grief took away my happiness forever." If I say that in 2 weeks, a month, it's not unusual. If that becomes my mantra, everyone that asks, everything I say it over and over again. That, as we talk about neurons that fire together, wire together, it becomes a little path in my thinking. And then it becomes an automatic thing. How are you doing? I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to be happy again. It's automatic, we say it. And that little path grows into a road, grows into a freeway, and it becomes the path of least resistance. And we see people who years later have gone through things like the rest of us and just never came out of it. And partly because it just burrowed in their consciousness. Henry Ford had a saying, the man that started the whole car revolution: whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Interesting.
So if we think we can't live again after this grief, we might be right. If we think
it's self-determinant.
Yes, this grief is going to be very painful, but in time, I hope the grief helps me remember more of the love than the pain. That will be your path too.
But you don't want the individual to avoid the grief.
Absolutely not. There's no way around the pain but through the pain.
So you had the opportunity to work with one of the leaders in this body of thought and study, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who I studied in school 50 years ago. And you had the opportunity to get to know her, work with her on a couple of books. And then she talked about the 5 stages of grief. And then you wrote a book about the 6th stage.
Yeah. So first of all, one thing, and I always feel like I'm speaking on Elizabeth's behalf, she would always tell people the stages aren't linear. You don't have to do them in order. And one thing we all know for sure is grief is very messy. There's nothing neatly lined up about our grief. It's very messy.
It isn't guaranteed that you'll feel better 3 days from now than you do today.
And you don't leave denial, which is the I can't believe it, and then you move into the anger. They can all happen in an hour. The stages, for folks who may have not heard them, were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, the sadness, and acceptance. Now, we think of acceptance as there's one big acceptance you're going to find.
That's what I wanted to go to next, but you stepped on that landmine here, and that is the idea of closure. I see people who are suffering from grief. When I say suffering, some people manage grief, some people suffer inappropriately from grief, and some people think they don't have the right to feel better. And
Yeah.
then they talk about, I can't. Don't talk to me about closure. And you're such a thoughtful man and a great teacher, and you understand the power of linguistics, what the words mean. And you have a point of view about the term closure.
I don't believe in it. I don't ever want to close the door on my loved ones. You know, my mother's been dead for decades now. I remember her. I think about her. There's no closure. I think there's a modern media term, closure, that they want to put a neat button on every story and finish it. But that's not how real life works. Now, sometimes our friends want us to find closure, and what they mean is they want us to find peace.
Yes.
There is no day of closure, just like there is no day of acceptance. And you know, we find a little acceptance when we make the funeral arrangements. We find a little acceptance when we go to the funeral.
Boy, there's so many things we want to talk to you about. And one of them we'll come back to is this idea of the role of rituals.
Yes, yes. So there's so much around acceptance. And when we talk about this acceptance, there's also a reluctance that even I have felt in my own losses. I don't want to just accept that they died and be done. Our generation wants more. And I think what became the 6th stage that I wrote about in Finding Meaning, the 6th stage of grief, is this concept of meaning, that we can find meaning.
Pull that thread for us.
Yeah, when people hear meaning, they immediately go, there's no meaning in a horrible death. There's no meaning in a murder. There's no meaning in a death by cancer. And I go, of course not. Meaning is not in the death. Meaning is in us. It's what we do after. I'll give you an easy example right here and now. I teach people to name meaningful moments. Jim, you and I are talking. People are going to hear this. It's going to touch someone. It's going to help someone. That makes this a meaningful moment we're in. And the more meaningful moments we can find, and here's the part of it. You've mentioned your mom, I mentioned mine. When a loved one dies, part of us dies with them, but part of them lives on in us. So when people say, how do I find meaning? I would say, Jim, what part of your mother lives on in you? And can you nurture that part? I say that to myself all the time. How do we nurture the parts of our spouses, our siblings, our parents, our children, our families, friends that have died. How can we nurture those parts in us? And that's the meaning, my friend.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
So we have a several windows, so to speak, open here. And finding meaning, your last book is a sixth stage of grief. Let's go back to that window and how it relates to another we opened up, which is being deliberate about our behaviors and managing our thought processes so as to create proper pathways in our brain versus allowing our lack of deliberate behaviors and lack of following our grieving checklist path to health. Otherwise, if you neglect your own healing, your pathways are going to be formed in a negative direction, and it'll be too easy to slip back there. Whereas what you're suggesting is, as you understand the different stages of grief, and if we can make it in a sloppy and nonlinear fashion to finding meaning, that's what I hear is that's how you manage your neurological pathways.
And the other word you mentioned a few moments ago that we just breezed by and I want to stop is you mentioned the word community. Here's the thing. We talk to our friends so many times, and our friends and family are so there for us. At a certain point, our friends and family don't know what to say. It's now a month after the funeral. It's 6 months after the funeral. They don't know how to help us. And what happens is they say things to us like it's time to move on. It's time to get over them. And I always say, our loved ones aren't a cold or a flu we get over. They're our loved ones. We learn to live with that loss. But part of what we need desperately to heal any grief and trauma is community. And so many times we need to find others who are grieving. That's why grief groups started. I think about so many times people end up isolating. The ones that I see who haven't healed, haven't found any healing, are the ones who ended up isolating.
Yes.
Now, think about this. What's the cruelest thing? We mentioned war already. What's the cruelest thing you can do in a war? Put someone in isolation. And so we need other people. Now, when we talk about those neural pathways in our brain, if you're talking to me, I might go, yes, but but when I hear other people who have been through what I've been through, and they're beginning to say it differently, my mind lets that in more.
You're learning.
And that's why I'm such a big believer. We have a huge online group, Tender Hearts, whether it's my group, whether it's folks' group at their place of worship, at the local hospice, nonprofit. Groups help enormously in grief.
It helps in everything.
It helps in everything. It's true.
It helps just to stay healthy, as according to Gallup in the most recent release. 1 in 7 American adults says that they've never had a friend.
Yeah.
That's sad. That's so sad. And there's so much we need to do for ourselves in terms of being deliberate about having relationships. That's why I'm so concerned, frankly, David, with this idea that for the knowledge workers, the 20% of the workforce that has the option from time to time to work from home, how unhealthy I think that can be over the long term.
Yeah.
Because
Great.
or recovery or just good mental health, there's a reason why you join the Kiwanis Club and you go bowling and you join a meetup group to go to visit museums, because as we're social animals, we need interactivity, and isolation is the greatest punishment we've ever invented.
So true. Couldn't agree more.
So when you're talking, let me move you to the workplace because we just touched on that. I wrote a piece in our Celebrations Pulse newsletter that goes out every Sunday about collective grief. Boy, it sparked a lot of interactivity with our community, a tremendous amount, and it touched a nerve on a lot of people just in our workplace who've reached out to me about, thank you for talking about grief. You know, I'm afraid to tell people that I'm hurting in the workplace. I try and hide it, and trying to hide it, it causes me to withdraw, puts me in a darker place. And the fact that you're encouraging us to be able to talk about this in the workplace is helping me. And our HR team is so terrific at Flowers and helping us deal with this. But talk to us about, you just touched on it, about how we're all afraid to be around someone who's grieving because we don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to say the wrong thing. So what we do is we avoid, which forces isolation. What should we do?
Absolutely. And we don't know. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. My website that I see the back end of is grief.com. And I get to see the statistics. And what's fascinating to me is the page that gets visited the most between 12 and 3 a.m. is literally the best and worst things to say to people in grief. We don't know what to say. We're a grief illiterate world, and people get so afraid that they either missed a window or they don't have the right words. They're always looking for the right words. They don't want to do the wrong thing. I always say to people, 2 things to remember. Never start a sentence with at least. At least they're not suffering anymore. At least this happened. At least they're in a better place. All those things. And, you know, obviously, if someone went to their clergy and their clergy said they're in heaven, they're in a better place, it would be meaningful if you sought it out versus you talking about your pain and someone goes, oh, no, they're in a better place. It sounds like be quiet. And it's like, sometimes I miss them here. So don't start sentences with at least. The second thing is, it's okay to say, I don't have the right words, but I just want you to know I love you and I'm here.
Yes.
That's all we need to say. It really is. And the second piece is, we're afraid we missed the window. People say to me all the time, you know, a week has gone by, a month has gone by. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to send flowers. I missed that window. I go, no, you haven't.
The window doesn't close.
The window, my gosh, you can reach out at a month. You can send flowers at a month. You can have coffee at a month. You can do that. Hey, I've been thinking about you and your mom. I know it's been 6 months. Let's have coffee. I know it's Mother's Day. You know, there is no window. You can't miss it. That's a great way to say that. I'm going to use that, Jim. You can't miss the window.
That's so thoughtful. You know, we look back and what are the pieces that we've written that in our archives that get the most lookup traffic? One is what to say when you have someone in your life who has a loss. It's number one, far and away.
So if we're both getting that, you know, it's like reality. We're almost like research.
And close behind that is what to say when a friend loses a pet.
I always say, if the love is real, the grief is real. If the love is real, the grief is real.
Well, that's another one I'm going to borrow. So I like the fact that the window never closes, and people will appreciate your effort, that you don't have to worry about, you can't say this, but you don't say that. And the only thing you're saying is don't say at least. Okay, that's the only rule we can remember that. Is frequency too much? Can you say it too often? Is it, well, it's been 7 months. If I bring it up, I might trigger them to have bad thoughts, and maybe they were getting over it.
You know, I hear that a lot. People come to me and they'll say exactly that. Should I mention my coworker's mom, brother, sister that died, spouse? Should I mention it? And I'll say, absolutely. Then they'll come back to me and they'll say, David, I took your advice and I mentioned it and I made them cry. And I say, no, you didn't make them cry. They were crying already. You just joined the club of a safe person they can now cry with. They now feel safe with you because you mentioned it.
So much there. In the workplace, you return to work, you're in the office and you look across and there's Diane. And you know she lost her sister a month ago. You haven't seen her since. They're smart enough to go to grief.com and say, what do I do? Do I get her when we're both in a coffee room? Do I say something to her? Do I handwrite a note? Do I send her a text, an email? Do I not say anything because it's 4 or 5 weeks?
Right.
What would you advise that lady at the office who says, what do I say and do about Diane? I didn't know her that well, but clearly this is the first time I've seen her since the passing.
So here's what you don't want to do. Well, first of all, timing is everything. At the beginning of a meeting, you don't want to say, Diane, so sorry about your loss. Not at the beginning of the meeting. Timing, you wait till after the meeting. You wait till you're alone in the break room. You wait till you're walking out at the end of the day and you go, Diane, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. If you want to go here, you can stop there. I'm so sorry about your loss. It's heartbreaking to hear what you've been through. Or if you want to go further, you want to have that kind of relationship, you can say, I'm here if you ever want to talk. And you leave it at that, just letting them know. And you know, the other thing is, when you happen to know, oh, a month ago, the death happened. Should I mention it? Sure, absolutely.
And as a result of a couple of big trends, one is the increased frequency of deaths resulting in a cremation. So now over 50% in the US. You have the phenomenon that we talked about rituals before, and we can do a couple hours on rituals. I'm so keenly interested in that subject, and you are so knowledgeable, David. But when we talk about rituals, they've changed now, because when someone who lives out near you in California and they have a loss, but most of their family is back east, and they decide that a cremation is appropriate for them. Now they don't have to rush like in the Jewish or the Christian faith, where it wanted to move kind of quickly by religious law or by practice. Now they say, well, let's have a service for Uncle Joe, but let's wait until 2 weeks from Saturday so we can give people enough notice. And now we're not going to a chapel like we used to, a funeral home or a chapel. Uncle Joe used to love Tony's Italian Restaurant, and maybe we can have an event, a function in their restaurant where we invite Uncle Joe's friends from the East Coast. Anyone local who wants to come, we'll do a nice memorial service, play some of his favorite songs, serve his favorite vegetarian lasagna, and have a nice commemoration. How do those changes in rituals impact our understanding of the death process, the rituals? It changes, elongates, but definitely changes rituals.
I have two concerns. The first concern, and I want to make sure everyone thinks about this, what I'm going to say in the context of pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, I talked about some trends I was seeing, and one of the trends I was seeing is people who were having issues with the grieving process and moving forward and coming out of it. I would ask them the usual questions. Everything would sound like it always does. And then I would say, tell me about where your loved one is now. They at the cemetery, what did you do? Tell me about the memorial. And they would go, well, you know, everyone's so scattered. it was inconvenient to have a memorial, and I have the ashes in the closet. We haven't figured out what to do. Jim, we need the rituals. We need the rituals.
So what are you suggesting to the people who had losses during COVID and you got that note, due to the circumstances, we're going to do a very small, private, very immediate family, and we'll do something when we can all gather again. Most of them never happened.
Yes, so either we still find a way to gather on an anniversary date, on a heavenly birthday, we gather just like you folks years later are sending a text chain, like find a way to gather in that person's honor. Just gather in their honor and talk about them. And it's never too late. It's never too late. That's our mind telling us we missed the window. And it's like, no, we still miss people. The other thing, and if you ever get an invite to something long after, please honor it and know it's sacred. And people hoped you would still attend. The other thing is going back to the Italian restaurant. I love the idea of it. I want to be careful that, and I love the idea of celebrations of life. I just don't want rituals to be, we're gathering to be happy and you can't be sad.
Yes.
We do need a place for our grief and our sadness. We need, I hope when they gather at the Italian restaurant, if someone cries, it becomes a sweet moment where everyone goes, we know, not a moment of, Debbie, this is supposed to be a fun night. Why are you crying and ruining it?
David, as we come up on the holiday season now, as a floral and gift company, a company that's built around the idea of giving, and in particular that try and remind people that giving, however you give, whether it's a tangible gift or it's a thoughtful card, or it's your daughter who makes you, who's a little girl, and she makes you a gift certificate book because that's what she can do. The real gift there is in the giving. And I mentioned my friend, Dr. George Everly, and one of the questions I asked him that night while we were gathered for dinner with a large group of the management team here at Flowers, I asked him, I said, George, we've come around to the point here in our company where we've really focused in on, we're not in a gift business, we're in a relationship business. We're in a relationship business in that our job is to help our community to have more and better relationships in their life. And we have a very selfish motivation there, because if the things we do stimulate people to connect more, to be deliberate about their relationships, their relationship management plan, the relationships they have, the relationships that have waned that they want to reinvigorate, the relationships they don't have but they want to have, and we work with them on reminders and tools and suggestions on how they can invest in those relationships. What we realized in that process is that the big unlock there is our conclusion that giving is a gift to ourselves, whether we give of our time or we give of our emotions or our thoughtfulness. And we send, and I say to Patty, who's been my victim and my assistant for 31 years, Patty, I apologize, I haven't said this to you in a while, but you're the greatest ever invented on earth. And you're one of the best people I've ever met and been lucky enough to know, and now been lucky enough to work with you for 31 years. That is a gift from me to be able to say that, but it makes me feel terrific inside when I finally smarten up and say it to her. So the giving is the gift. And I said to George Everly that night, is there physical evidence of that? And he says, absolutely. When you give of yourself, a thoughtful text, a compliment, an attaboy, or a tangible gift, in the brain, we can map electrically this firing a synapse in your brain, in the dopamine section of your brain that releases dopamine, which is a direct benefit to you and your emotions in the moment. So we were thrilled to hear that what we came to more emotionally and certainly not scientifically, that there is scientific evidence to it. But now we come upon the holidays, David, and people don't know what to do. Mother's Day, we're coming up on the fall holidays here. We have Thanksgiving, we have Christmas, we have Hanukkah, we have New Year's. But holidays like that, some people say, oh, it's a painful time for me because I lost my spouse, I lost a child, I lost a father, a mother, a grandmother, and it's a sad time for me. We give our community options. If you don't want to hear about Mother's Day, you don't want to hear about Christmas, you don't want to hear about Thanksgiving, opt out. Feel free to do that. You can opt out for the moment, and we'll talk to you another time. But how do we work with our community, our employees, ourselves, our vendors, our community members, to help them to think differently about sad memories and milestones, and not allow it to crush the good things of those occasions and holidays in the process?
I think it is understanding that we have hills and valleys in life, and to not be afraid of those valleys. And we need to be there for each other for both. We need to know how to say happy birthday and I'm so sorry. We need to be able to say congratulations and this is a hard time and I'm thinking of you. I mean, we need to have these languages. We need to have both languages. We need to find that balance. And it does, going back to our brains, it does change things. If I'm having a day, gosh, this is such a hard day. I don't matter in the world. I don't care about the world doesn't care about me. And Jim sends me a text, David, thinking about you, great interview. What, I'm looking for the text, Jim, just joking. Like if I get that, I'm like, oh, it interrupts my negative thinking. It actually interrupts the negative. And I just, not even to do a shameful plug for you. I mean, who doesn't like surprise flowers? I mean, that brightens everyone's day. I mean, I've never gotten flowers that have depressed me. They make me happy. They make me feel joy. And I'll tell you, for the people who feel like I missed the window, the holidays are another window.
Thank you for those suggestions around holidays. And let me turn finally to the long list of questions I had for you. One is around, we were chatting in our team here about when I was a kid, I don't know that I knew of a nursing home. I lived in a blue-collar community, multi-ethnic community, and a lot of 2 and 3 story, 2, 3, and 4 family houses, oftentimes one related family. The seniors were on this floor, the middles are on this. And our older relatives, parents, grandparents, stayed with us until they were gone. And now, several generations later, now nursing homes are endemic. Oftentimes because of us baby boomers being the first generation to move in great numbers away from where we grew up and away from our families for adventure, for work, for a myriad of reasons. Families are not as connected as they were.
And financially, we don't live in a world where you can say to your employers, I have to run over to the nursing home 3 times or run home to check on mom.
Well, that's something we're trying to work on. We have in our Harry and David brand, which is our food brand, where we grow these terrific pears and apples and peaches and grapes. That team of people at Harry and David have made caregivers their focus.
Yes.
They are wonderful people. And, this our community, Harry and David, is based in Southwest Oregon, Rogue Valley in Medford, Oregon. And they've been suffering through a drought up until this year, which has had a consequence on our product and its availability and its quality. And this year it's back to being terrific in quality and quantity. But last year we had a flash fire go through town. 1,200 people lost their homes, including 121 of our people. But they are so amazingly resilient, David. There's a lady who's here with me in this office today, had a meeting the day after the fire, a Zoom meeting, the day after the fire went through Oregon. And she made a comment in the beginning that this one lady certainly wouldn't be on the call from Medford because of what happened yesterday. She lost a home. She said, no, I'm here. She said, hey, I'm in my car. I was able to recharge my phone and I'm here. Business must go on, because if we're going to rebuild this community, if I'm going to rebuild my home, I'm going to have to make sure we're successful and I have income and I have a great support of the people around me. And when she told me that story and I shared it with a whole company, it just shows you the value of community and resilience. That particular community of people at Harry and David has been focused on caregivers. And there are 60 million of us in the US who identify as caregivers. A disabled child, a neighbor, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a cousin, a sibling, that we care for in some way. And we've been chatting with a group of employers about just that subject that you just mentioned, David, about how do we, look, we're not going to say you have to get your job done, but if you need some flexibility and you're going to put in the hours a little later on this day and a little earlier on that day because you have caregiving responsibilities, we have to find a way to be sensitive and adaptive to that so that we can keep those good people engaged, employed, and a productive member of their community. But and to look at caregiving not as a burden, but as a gift or an opportunity.
That's beautiful and so needed because it is the hardest job in the world.
I asked you, how do you keep your spirits up? And given the work that you do, it would be so easy to succumb to other people's grief. But that is the same question we have to ask people who work in the hospice world, who work in the clergy world, who have the opportunity to bring great comfort, but have to be very deliberate about managing their own emotions so that they can be effective in what they do. And is there a language around end of life conversations that that you've worked on, that you've been studying, that you bring to our community as suggestions in terms of how we think about and how we manage our language around people who are in the work at end of life or have family members that are clearly at the end of life?
Boy, talk about a whole nother large conversation there.
I think all we did was talk about chapter headings today.
Yeah, oh my gosh, the language is a little archaic in that world. And they're really trying to, let me just tell you, like many of us, when our loved ones got near the end of life, someone comes in and says, do you want to make your loved one a DNR, a do not resuscitate? I got to tell you, who wants to make mom or dad a DNR? I mean, why would you withhold a resuscitation from mom and dad after all they did for you? It's just the wrong language.
Language, yes.
We've been introducing, instead of saying DNR, the language of AND. Allow natural death. When mom or dad get to that point, I want to allow them a natural death. And hospitals are beginning to adapt that language now.
So
It makes a difference.
Language is everything. David, you're right. I could talk to you forever. You're so smart. You're so thoughtful. And I feel like it's a privilege to share you and your wisdom and your experience with our community. And the last time we did this, and I'm sure this time, we get overwhelmed with people who say, wow, that helped me. That was thoughtful. And I just think it's a privilege for me and for us to share you with our community. Thank you for sharing your time with us, David, for being who you are and making your journey a one of turning your pain, your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience to everyone else's benefit around you.
Tim, right back at you. I always love talking to you, and I could do it all day. So whenever you want, I'm here for these conversations. And I just love the people we're getting to help today that are listening in on this. And maybe we're giving them a little light in their darkness. So thanks so much, Tim.
For those of you who would like to get more, David, I recommend your book to you about the 6th stage of grieving, which is finding meaning. I think even if it's not about grief, that is something worth all of us reading again and again. And to visit your site at grief.com and to think about, could you benefit from being part of the Tender Hearts community? I suspect there are many of us out there who could not only benefit from, but could be beneficial to being part of a community like that.
And I'll tell you, we have over literally now, we just hit 26 grief groups. So specific, whether it's death of your mom, your dad, your spouse, your child. We do those by ages, by addiction, by suicide. We've got a faith group, a people of color group, so many groups there now that are available to help people. And the beautiful thing about it is no one's ever turned away for lack of funds. So it's really a great group. So thank you for mentioning that.
You continue to amaze me, David. David, I hope the holiday season upcoming is terrific for you and all around you. And I hope we get to chat again soon.
Me too. Thank you so much. Thank you to your team as always.
Thanks, David.
It's my sister's birthday.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com.
They have tons of great birthday gifts.
Wow.
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 Happy birthday, baby.
Wow.
Yummy. I got to contain myself.
1-800-Flowers.
Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.